Hey guys, we're gonna finally do a video of the Frankenstein truck. Okay, so what we got is a 2002 Chevy S10 crew cab. It's the LS model, so kind of basic. It does have power windows, power door locks, all that kind of stuff. First thing I did when I bought it was get it to where it'd pass Oregon emissions. Got it registered, titled, insurance, all that stuff, and then immediately pulled it into the shop and tore down pretty much everything on it. So the only thing that's left S10 is obviously body and frame and engine, and that's about it. So I guess the most extensive thing to talk about is the front axle here. I think that's where most of the work's done. What we have is a high pinion Dana 44 out of a 78 Bronco. It's not the most desirable high pinion 44, mostly because it has the cast wedges on it. The more desirable ones are either the weld wedge from like I think it's like 75 to 77 Dana 44s, or the 3/4 ton version has the weld on perches, and all of that stuff can be ground off super easy and then a truss kit put on from there. This is the axle that I had available to me, and like I said, I was doing this on a budget, and this front axle was dirt cheap. I think I only paid like 50 bucks for the whole front axle. So I decided to modify it the way that I could figure out how to modify it, which is I cut the wedges off, which left big holes in there, and I went ahead and welded a plate on. It's probably not the most structural thing, but I figured with the trussing and everything on there, it would kind of add some of that rigidity back into it. And then I built my own custom truss, and that's all welded into the C's, which I believe are forged. And then I've got all these big plates on here that tie into all the axle tubes, and it's all tied in from there. Now the reason I decided to go with a 1/2 ton front end is the 1/2 ton running gear is, I think, like 3 inches, maybe even 4 inches narrower overall than the 3/4 ton and 1 ton axles, and that was important to me because I wanted to keep the truck fairly narrow. Underneath here I have that wedge cut off and a cap welded on it, and then I spanned from the C over to one of my braces for the truss for my brackets for the shock tabs and the lower link mounts, and then obviously my upper link mount you can kind of see back in there. Now we have stainless steel braided lines. Those I had custom made at a local hydraulic shop. I've had them make a couple sets of lines for me, and they work out pretty well. So this right here, this is just a universal Firestone airbag that's designed to fit inside a coil spring like that, and I use that as kind of like my poor man air bump. It's set up to where it just starts to hit that at full bump. I'll probably build a spacer so it works a little bit more effectively, but it's a little bit of a trial at this point to see if it does what it's supposed to do. So obviously you can see there's been a lot of trimming and cutting up in the fender wells to make these 40s fit. The front axle's pushed like 9 inches farther forward than factory, so a lot has had to come out of that firewall and inner fender liners. Now, one of the cool things that went along with the solid axle swap is the Ford track bar fit almost perfect. That's actually the track bar bracket for the Ford. That's the one that bolts onto the original Ford frame, and I was able to use the steering box bolt as a locator and then fully welded around it, added some gusseting in there, and then was able to weld it into my new cross member that I put across there. Now this front end, I went ahead and did 513 US gears in it, and it's got a Yukon Grizzly locker and factory axle shafts for right now. We actually just replaced the U-joints in those axle shafts. They were starting to make some noise and had some play in them, and it looked like they were actually the original U-joints from 1978, which is pretty wild. Okay, so under here you can see to do the solid axle swap I had to cut this front cross member out, and I just welded a new plate in and then modified it to fit around my steering. And we have a Astro van steering box, and this gives us a front throw on the pitman arm instead of a back throw. Now that allowed me to move the front axle forward like I wanted to do, so this front end is actually 9 inches farther forward than what the axle center line on the factory S10 was. We have the original 1978 Ford pitman arm on here, and that's going to a rough stuff Y-link setup with the GM 110 tie rod ends, and this has been a really nice addition getting to this beefier steering on here. The kit that I used as kind of my base for the solid axle swap is a those are 4.5 inch lift springs from a Jeep TJ, and all of the arms were originally Rubicon Express arms for that same TJ, and I lengthened them out to match the lengths that I needed and work with the geometry that I had decided I wanted for this truck. And they've worked well so far, but I do have new joints and new arms sitting in the shop that I need to put together because these ones are super noisy, and I think I can figure out a little bit nicer way to have them all packaged. Underneath you can see we have this transfer case cross member, transmission cross members modified to handle this front drive shaft dropping down, and that's just literally a piece of plate steel. I've welded on there, put a couple gussets on the back, some triangulated gussets on the back, and that's worked out pretty well. Haven't noticed any issues with the way that's set up at the moment. And then as you can see, that's my frame side mount right there for the upper link. Now, on all GMs that you solid axle swap, the crossover for the exhaust is almost always in the way on the 4-wheel drive trucks. I happen to find this 2-wheel drive Y pipe, and it fits in here perfectly and gives me all the clearance I need for the front drive shaft in there. Then one other thing I did, because another issue with these S10s is this oil cooler tends to leak all the time, and that's it's like an adapter that goes on where the oil filter is now, runs all the way to the front, and it does a remote oil filter up there, and those lines always leak. So I just got rid of that and mounted that straight on the engine right there. Okay, and then one other thing to note on the transfer case, you can kind of see up in there, this is a bolt-on style U-joint. It's not the slip yoke style like this transfer case normally comes with. Now there's a couple different ways you can go to that style. You can get a Jeep transfer case, front shaft and front yoke and everything, and put it in one of these S10 cases. But I happen to have an older S10 231 case that had this on it, and I just stole that out of there, and it bolted right up in there. It was super simple. And then was able to use the yoke end off of the drive shaft for the S10, and this was a slip yoke out of a Ford, and I just sleeved it and welded my own front drive line together. It's not perfect, but I can do like 40 miles an hour in full drive without it vibrating too bad. So I haven't found a need to go any faster than that, so I haven't really needed to go get it balanced. Now onto the back, what we got is a Ford 9-inch. This is out of a 79 F-150. It's got 513 gears as well, and it has just a full spool in it. That's going to be changed hopefully here sometime this year, because I absolutely hate that spool. They work awesome off-road, but this thing gets a lot of street miles, and it's miserable driving it on the street like that. So to get the 9-inch in here, that was pretty simple. We just did a spring over, welded new spring pads on the axle, and I originally was running it just that way with the Chevy S10 springs and a spring over, and it was like 3 inches low in the back, which I didn't necessarily mind the look of too much, but the springs didn't work that well, especially with when I've got the tent loaded on here and all my gear in the back. So I got these Chevy 63s and bought, I believe it was a Barnes 4-wheel drive swap kit for like a Toyota or something like that, and put these 63s in there. And then it's got the Rubicon Express rear shocks off of the TJ in it, and those things don't work very good, but it's what I had at the time, and this has definitely been a budget build so far. That's the factory S10 drive shaft. It surprisingly fits almost. It's a little bit short, but it's worked for the time being, and it's just got a conversion U-joint in it. I'm waiting to figure out what transmission transfer case combo I'm going to go with before I have a driveline built, because I don't want to have like multiple drivelines built. But the big thing to note with this rear end is I went ahead and did a disc brake conversion on it, and I kind of did my own setup, and I'm going to go ahead and post some pictures up now and even a couple videos, I think. So what I used was the factory S10 rear disc brakes. I had to machine down the flange on the axle shaft, which I did with just putting the truck in gear and running an angle grinder on it until I got it to be the diameter that I needed, and machined a lip out of the inside of the rotor and was able to re-drill the S10 rotor and fit it on the Ford axle shaft, and then cut out this bracket and mounted my brake caliper on there, and they work really well. My only complaint so far with this setup is I do not have an e-brake any longer, so I'm gonna have to try to figure out something there to be able to have an e-brake, because it's a little sketchy not having one right now. So the truck's sitting on 40-inch nittos, 40 1350 by 17s, and those are 17 by 9 Dick CPEX with fairly low offset on them. So it was very important to me to have the truck not be super wide. I know that helps like stability wise, but I just don't really like the look of when the tires are really hanging outside the fender wells. Now the interior is pretty stock S10 for the time being. One thing that I did, and this happened in the process of doing the solid axle swap, but I swapped this truck to a 5-speed. I've mentioned before that I'm not a big fan of automatics, and so the first opportunity I got, I bought a donor truck with a 5-speed in it and swapped it in here. Now this NV3500 is not handling the 40s very well. It's starting to make quite a bit of noise, and so I'm currently looking at different options, and I'm not sure what path I'm going to go with yet. Probably like an NV4500 and a 241 doubler. I'm definitely wanting to get some lower gearing in this thing, because I want to be able to go do some rock crawling stuff, like hit the Rubicon, and also having those super low gears can help with some of the snow that we get up here, being able to just kind of creep up on the top of the snow and not really sink down in. So, but this is kind of the whole reason that we bought the crew cab, is so that we can have enough room for the toddler seat in the back. It's definitely snug in here with 2 adults that are over 6 foot, and then a very large child and 2 dogs, but we make it work. Front bumper is just kind of a custom built, very simple. It started out as just a winch plate. I think it's like a Harbor Freight winch plate that I just built some brackets. I cut the end of the frame off, welded some plates on there with some studs hanging out of it, and got the bumper bolted on that way. This is a piece of 2-inch pipe that I didn't even bend. I just cut some wedges out of it and got the angles that I needed, and it fit the shape of the front of the truck really well. Then mounted my light, my winch, and all that stuff. We actually have the winch controller mounted back in there, and this is the wireless Smitty belt, so I don't really have to be able to get to things too easily, but it works out really good. So excuse the mess back here. I haven't really cleaned it too much since the last trip out in the snow. As you can tell, sled's in there. But and this is kind of how I keep it set up for just wheeling. We've got, you know, our off-road bin, so that's got jumper cables, funnels, fluid. What else do we got in here? Tire patch kit, some propane, a propane torch, and then I keep my tools in here, my my Smitty built air compressor, which that thing has been awesome, and then all of my recovery straps, and we always keep a saw on us in the winter time because we often come to down trees, and then I like to carry a hatchet and then my bow saw. In the back here, we've got a power inverter for the summertime when we're doing some overland camping. And then I built this really basic shelf. I was planning on building a full kitchen out of the back here, but I'm not really sure what I want to do yet, so I haven't dove into that. So hopefully at some point we'll have a video of that. But I just built a basic platform in here to start with to give me a little bit more usable space. And then you can see up there, we've got our Tough Stuff 270-degree awning, and that is mounted on kind of a rack system that I built myself. Super basic. I was planning on doing something kind of like a Prinsu or something like that, but I ran out of time, so I just kind of built something super basic, and you know, it works pretty good. And then we also have a Tough Stuff Alpha, the full-size Alpha that we put on top in the summertime. And the tent is great, but it definitely makes the truck tippy when we're off-road, so I'm gonna have to start figuring out some other things there. Okay, so that was kind of a basic overview of the truck. It's pretty simple in the grand scheme of things. Just a solid axle swapped S10. Kind of the magic in it is just building it simple, using parts that are easy to get, that are fairly available if you go to any auto parts store. And that makes it really comfortable for the family and I. We definitely have a few more projects on the build list for this year. I think the three major things I want to do are get rid of the spool, and we're going to put in an ARB air locker in the back. I'm hoping that's going to help some of the drivability on the road. We're going to go with some more custom tuned shocks, so hopefully some full resi, fully tunable shocks front and rear. And then I'm going to soften up the back to match the spring rate-ish on the front, and put sway bars front and rear on it. They're going to be like the Rock Jock style ones. I think I'm just going to get them either like TJ ones or some JK ones, and retrofit them to the truck, because I think weight-wise, width-wise, they should kind of work out pretty well. And I'm curious to see how the truck handles there. I'm willing to lose a little bit of flex to gain a little bit of stability when I have the rooftop tent on it, because the rooftop tent makes this thing a little hairball. Okay, if there's any questions, go ahead and ask them in the comments below. I know there's probably some people out there that have a lot of questions, or at least I'm hoping people have questions, because I love answering them. I love talking about the stuff that I build. So go ahead and hit the like button, throw a comment in there, and I will do my best to answer the questions to the best of my ability. All right, thanks guys. We'll see you on the next one.